A warm welcome to the program today. I'm Amarachi Ubani in Lagos. Let's get into it now. NATO foreign ministers are meeting in Bucharest, Romania, and a show of solidarity and practical support for the country, that's Ukraine, as Russia targets its energy grid and infrastructure. Ukraine's foreign minister, Dmytro Kuleba, will be briefing ministers on the latest situation. He's already called for the West to step up its supply of weapons and ammunition. The U.S. is expected to announce a new package for aid for Ukraine to help restore electricity supplies, with millions of civilians already affected by the power outages. The support is also likely to include help for neighboring Moldova, which is suffering the consequences. Just a while ago, the Moldovan Deputy Prime Minister warned people to prepare for days of rolling blackouts. He says Moldova is facing a hybrid war waged by Moscow and their local proxies. Britain's Foreign Secretary James Cleverly has accused Russian President Vladimir Putin of trying to freeze Ukraine into submission, but that the people of Ukraine have proven the resilience and that Russia would not succeed. Now, NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg spoke to reporters as ministers went into the meeting in Bucharest. He said NATO allies are sending supplies and working to rebuild Ukraine's infrastructure. NATO foreign ministers are, of course, discussing increasing military assistance for Ukraine, such as air defense systems and ammunition. They're also considering non-lethal aid.
We have delivered generators, we have delivered spare parts, and the allies are in different ways helping to rebuild the destroyed infrastructure. We need to realize that there are enormous effects of the attacks. The Ukrainians are able to shoot down many of the incoming missiles and drones, but not all of them, and therefore these attacks has caused significant damage. I think we all have seen these pictures taken from satellites, where you see Europe in light and then you see Ukraine dark, and that reflects the enormous consequences. So there is a huge task to rebuild all of this.
I hope we will agree on a quite significant package of non-lethal help to Ukraine, which should aim for winterization.
We will have also meetings with those countries, Turkey and Hungary, who has not yet ratified Finnish and Swedish membership to NATO, but we are already 28 countries out of 30 who have done the ratification.
And everything boils down to a dialogue. We believe that we are on a steady path towards reaching all the conditions laid down in the memorandum. We also expect this to be the case. I would like to underline, though, that there are things in this memorandum which is important to Sweden as well, as for instance the better cooperation between crime-fighting authorities. This is important because we see that people commit crimes in Sweden and then go off to Turkey, and we want to have them back in order to be able to fulfill the process of carrying out justice.
A brief view of some of the foreign ministers attending the meeting in Bucharest. Much earlier, Mr. Stoltenberg said the NATO alliance would not pull back support for Ukraine. He also called on partners to pledge more winter aid for Kyiv, as it braced itself for more cold and darkness due to the Russian attacks on infrastructure. Stoltenberg says the only way to get right terms for negotiation to begin between Ukraine and Russia will be for Ukraine to advance on the battlefield. Russia has acknowledged attacking Ukrainian infrastructure, but denies hurting civilians.
With Kherson, in the south of Kherson, allies are providing advanced air defense systems and different systems that can both address the threats that are represented by the different types of drones, but also cruise and ballistic missiles. And I expect that one of the messages from the foreign ministerial meeting here in Bucharest will be the need to further step up the provision both of air defense systems, but also, of course, spare parts, training and ammunition to the different air defense systems, because we need to help Ukraine to defend themselves against this horrific type of warfare.
Let's bring in international affairs commentator Calvin Dark. He's in Washington. Calvin, great to see you. Now, this will be one of the many meetings that NATO has had and probably will have regarding Ukraine. The only difference is that this time the focus is on the welfare of Ukrainians. How does this supersede even military aid to Ukraine at this time?
Well, yes, good to be here today. I think it can all boil down to winter is coming. The Ukrainians know this. Putin knows this. The world knows this. And I think what this meeting kind of symbolizes is that we realize this is more than just a military conflict. You know, if that was true, it would just be military aid. But one of Putin's goals in this invasion of Ukraine is to wear down the spirit of the Ukrainians. And to do that, that could change the battle militarily. So I think the NATO allies and the United States realize that they have to support Ukraine in more ways than just military because, like I said, winter's coming. This is going to be difficult on so many levels for the Ukrainians.
You can imagine. Ministers are supposed to pledge non-lethal aid such as fuel. They'll also be focused on medical supplies, winter equipment, and drone jammers. For many of the ministers attending the NATO meeting, their countries have already pledged billions of dollars in military aid. How concerned are you about donor fatigue, and how that affects strategies that NATO might also be coming up with at the meeting?
Donor fatigue is real. And let me tell you, here in the United States, it's going to get very difficult after January because the Republicans will be taking over the House of Representatives. Now, just to clarify, how things work here in the U.S., we always say that the House of Representatives holds the purse strings, meaning that President Biden sets foreign policy and he will continue to do that. However, if anything requires money, it has to go through the Republican House of Representatives. And there are several very influential members of this incoming Republican Party in Congress that have said there will be no more money spent, if they can help it, for Ukraine. And part of the reason is they campaign that how can they justify spending more money to help Ukrainians through a difficult winter when there are problems in their own communities with their constituents. So I think that donor fatigue is going to be real in the U.S. and probably in other countries in Europe.
Yeah, and the people of Ukraine are still without electricity in many parts, all thanks to the Russian strikes on the country, even though the government is working really hard to restore power in many regions. Moldova has been affected. Power has been knocked out, just as it was knocked out in Ukraine. I think they share the same line. They draw their own power from Ukraine. So the country's being a member of NATO, joining in 1992, will the current power situation in Moldova be considered an attack on a NATO member? And what are the fine lines that we're threading here?
So I believe that an attack on critical infrastructure can be just as dangerous and harmful as a traditional military attack. But one of the things that I thought about was, recently when there was the rocket that landed in Poland and, we didn't know at the beginning exactly where the source was, you had a lot of folks calling for, the invocation of Article 4 and 5 of NATO. But you heard a lot of leaders in NATO countries were like, slow your roll. They weren't all in. And I think that kind of represents, we talk about donor fatigue, NATO ally fatigue. So is an attack like this an attack that is just as serious as a military attack when you take away electricity? Of course. Do I think that NATO allies would treat that like a military attack on a member? Probably not.
Interesting. I guess we have to wait until the meeting ends. Calvin, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you. Have a good one.
Well, in other developments out of Ukraine, President Volodymyr Zelenskiy says Russian missiles have struck 30 settlements of Kherson region at least 258 times, damaging the pumping station which supplies water to Mykolaiv. In his regular evening address, President Zelensky mentioned this. Russian forces have retreated from the west bank of the Dnieper River, but have been shelling towns and villages, including the city of Kherson, from new vantage points on the opposite bank. And just before his address in the evening, President Zelensky met with the foreign ministers of Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, Iceland, Finland, Norway, and Sweden in the Ukrainian capital, Kyiv, to discuss Russia's attacks on his country. Attacks have knocked out power in most of Ukraine. They've left thousands of people out in the cold this winter. Even as central heating has also been affected. President Zelensky has already warned citizens to expect another brutal week of cold and darkness, predicting more Russian attacks on infrastructure that will cease until Moscow ran out of missiles. But some cheering news is trains connecting the Ukrainian city of Kharkiv with the village of Sufivka has been completed. The village actually runs near the Russian border. Ukrainian railway terams have been repairing destroyed train lines in the Kharkiv region for over a month now. One railway worker said that they spotted 77 damages, including rails and tracks, and worked for more than a month, which have paid off as the route has been renewed from Kharkiv to Sufivka. Russian forces were ousted from the northeastern region of Kharkiv back in September. Just taking a look at the railway repairs in Kharkiv, which will help many Ukrainians move around through that part of the country. The VOA's Anna Chernikova joins us now. She's in Kyiv. Anna, great to see you. And I just wondering how you're coping, with the power situation, the power outage in Kyiv today. How bad is the situation, not only in the capital city, but in the areas that are currently not under fire by the Russian missiles?
Good evening. If we are talking about, let's say, non-occupied areas and non-areas which have been recently liberated, situation is more or less controlled for the moment. I should say that it was much worse during the week, let's say during 3 days after the recent attack. However, in about 3-4 days, Ukrainian energy system was more or less stabilized. At least today, situation with electricity in Kyiv, for instance, is much better. So there are no outages for half a day. There are outages for, let's say, 4 hours, and then electricity is back, and then another outage for 4 hours. So currently, I don't have electricity, but I'm expecting it in about an hour. If we talk about recently liberated areas, let's say Kherson region and Kharkiv region, there are no outages there. If there are outages like in the other parts of Ukraine to stabilize the system. So there are only shortages of electricity if it is a certain accident happened, or if it is a certain repair work happening. So these areas do not have this, scheduled outages. The rest part of the country, of course, experience this, and situation is better in the city of Kyiv, and let's say in the west part of the country, also in the southeast, let's say about such cities as Dnipro, for instance. But we also see exceptions, and also in the central part of the country, like Vinnytsia region, situation is more difficult. So I should say that for the moment, it's no scheduled outages. It's still accident, as it's called, accident outages. However, they are more or less under the schedule and according to the schedule.
I can imagine, in between those times when there is power, how, you get as much heat as you can, from the central heating system until the power goes out. A lot of blankets, as you told us before. Now, President Zelensky talked about the number of strikes, over 200 of them since last week, and 30 settlements in Kherson alone. What is the situation outside of Kherson and Kyiv, and what are you hearing?
If we talk about recently liberated regions of Kherson and the city of Kherson itself, situation is quite tough. Russian forces are just on the other side of the river, so it gives them a really short distance for shooting. And the city of Kherson is actually under very bad shelling for all this time since its liberation. Today, for instance, just a couple of minutes ago, it was information in that Russian forces hit one of the hospitals in the city of Kherson. For the moment, we don't have information about victims or injured. For the moment, we only know that there are damages of the building. However, this accident just happened, so we might get more details soon. But in general, a lot of residential areas are under the target and under this heat. And we hear about victims, unfortunately. We hear about a lot of injured people and a lot of hospitalized people. Most of them are civilians. Also, there are energy workers, for example, who are also under very high risk. And we also have reports about people injured who were actually doing repair works. So in general, situation is tough because, as I already said, Russian forces are very close in terms of it's very short shooting distance for them. And in general, we also hear that a local government is encouraging people to evacuate if they have this possibility.
Yeah, we've heard some of those reports as well. Some regional governors asking people to evacuate. I'm sure you're keeping your eyes on the meeting going on in Bucharest, I suppose with the little battery power you have left on your phone. Are Ukrainians hopeful, however, about expectations will be met at the meeting? Leaders will be discussing not just military aid, but non-lethal aid to Ukraine.
Well, of course, it's a great sign that Ukraine is a part of this meeting, and Ukraine is actually have this opportunity to negotiate again extra help and additional help. We just got information that U.S. has approved $53 million of additional energy help. And basically, in terms of NATO meeting, of course, Ukrainians hope that that this support, military support, would be increased particularly in the section of the air defense, of course, and it will remain. So these are two main points that Ukrainians, of course, hope that this help would remain and and for some particular sections increased. Also, a big discussion is, of course, support of the energy system and defense of the energy system, if we talk about NATO meeting. So, and this is what both President Zelenskiy is talking about, and also Ukrainian foreign ministry and defense ministry, that, of course, Ukraine needs more defense in order to ensure and basically implement more actions for defense of particularly energy system facilities, because of course we see that this is the main target, and Ukrainians are actually preparing for another massive attack this week, and President Zelensky also talked about this and informed people to be ready. There were a lot of talk that this attack might happen today. However, today the day was more or less calm. So still this expectation is in the air, and people are still waiting for this massive attack this week. So we will see how it will turn, but it might be that next couple of days would be very tough for Ukraine.
Anna, I know you're speaking from an undisclosed location, probably in a bunker somewhere, so we appreciate the sacrifice you're making by keeping us up to date on what's going on in Ukraine. Do stay safe. Continue to keep us informed about your welfare. Thanks again.
Thank you. Thank you.